Welcome to this week's video. We are going to cover 5 of my favorite books. So as I sort of planned to do the video, I came up with about 30 books. What I've actually done is group them into different groups. So this week's edition is the Mind-Body Connection edition. And each of the books that I selected are very scientifically based. So you've kind of got mind-body information as far as energetics is concerned, which is like the alternate health world. And then you've got the mind-body connection where they're sort of marrying the science with the old school healing and mysticism side of things. So these books all bridge the gap between those two things. And each of these books played a really important role in my healing journey and my learning as a coach really up until this day. So there are 2 ways in which science explains the mind-body connection, or particularly these books, what they focus on. And the first one is epigenetics, which is the study of how the environment impacts our genes. So they used to think that everything was just set in stone and that nothing can be changed. But they've recently established that about 95% of our genetic potential or expression is actually impacted by the environment. So the environment being things like toxins, our emotional health, our traumas, our diet, our behavior, things like that. So we have a lot more control over our body and our health outcomes than we originally thought. And secondly is psychoneuroimmunology. So psychology, neurology, immunology, it's all about the connection and how those 3 things interplay together. And within those things, so within your neurology is your entire body. So it's not just your immune system and your nervous system and your brain, it's the whole body. Okay, so each book talks about how the mind impacts the body, and then in the reverse sense, how the body can impact the mind. So that is a quick introduction to start. So let's get into my favorite first, which is Dr. Joe Dispenza. So I originally discovered Joe Dispenza by full mistake. So I was just driving home one day from work and I had this impulse to go to this shop called the Hierophant at the Griffith Shops in Canberra. And I sort of had this hunch that there was something there for me. And by this point in my journey, I take hunches very seriously. So I turned around and I drove to the shop and I walked around and, didn't find anything. And then as I was walking out of the store, having given up, thinking I'm silly, for following my gut like that and finding nothing, I had the urge again. So then I went back through the shop again and I found this book. So You Are the Placebo by Dr. Joe Dispenza. And it kind of just stood out and I just knew that was for me. So then I read the back and I was like, yeah, this one. So that's the first one I read by him. So Dr. Joe Dispenza is a chiropractor / neuroscientist. So he's all about the nervous system, and then he's about the whole concept of how the mind can overcome the body. So all of our problems in life are kind of stored in the body, and we can actually pull the mind out of the body through meditation, certain meditation techniques that he teaches specifically and designs for this exact purpose. And by pulling it out of the body can actually correct and heal itself. So he runs workshops globally. He's actually quite a big deal. Yeah, so I went to one of his workshops in 2016 just by pure chance again. I thought, I wonder if he holds a workshop. And I went all the way to Seattle in America and basically went into this workshop thinking there'd be like 20 people there, and there was like 750. And it was this most full-on workshop. So my first real introduction to meditation, and it was like 3 or 4 hours long, some of them. It was really hectic, but it was fascinating. So he kind of gives you like all of his teachings, which are all in his books, and then he'll run a meditation to kind of solidify that teaching and show you how it works in the body. So really, really cool stuff. So You Are the Placebo is the second book he wrote. So the one I'm actually recommending is this one, which is his first book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. So it's about exactly that. His whole philosophy being that by the time we're 35, we're 95% programmed behavior. So we do everything automatically and subconsciously. Basically, our brain is conditioned to do what we do. And so if something goes wrong with the body, it's our job to then override that and actually change how the body functions to get it out of its disease state. It's a little bit more complex than that, but that's actually what his work's about. And that book talks all about the gap between like who you are now and your best or healthiest self and all the stuff in between, and how to kind of take a quantum leap in meditation from this current version of you who's having issues and then the future version of you who has no issues. And I practiced his work for a few years after loved it, got a lot out of it. Yeah, so that's my first recommendation. You can also check him out on YouTube because he's got a lot of really good videos on there, and his philosophies are really simple to understand once you consume enough of his stuff. So he just kind of repeats it over and over. It's amazing. Yeah, so that's the first one, Dr. Joe Dispenza and Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And then after that one, you can read the You Are the Placebo. So my next recommendation is Mind Over Medicine by Dr. Lissa Rankin, and that's this one. So this one's actually the first one that I ever read after I was really sick and I was kind of desperate. So I went really deep down the spirituality path, and then being kind of a logical, more grounded person myself, I was really looking for like, can you prove that this is legit? Because I don't want to invest all of this time and energy if it's just hearsay. You know, I wanted to understand in science, you know, like training and nutrition, there's a bit of woo-woo, but most of it's rooted in science. So it's really easy to assimilate once you understand how it works in the body scientifically. So this is kind of the same thing. So in a little search, I was online and I watched this video by a lady who overcome MS through diet. I had remembered seeing that video many years ago. So I looked that up and I watched it again. And then the next recommendation was a TED Talk by Dr. Lissa Rankin, and it was called Scientific Proof That We Can Heal Ourselves. So I watched that video, which was fantastic, and I'll link it below, and then looked her up from there, and then I purchased this book. So this book was the first one I read. So essentially her story was that she was a physician, or is a physician still, and she had like a nervous breakdown. So the pressure of the, you know, the medical system over there, and being a woman in the medical system was too much, and her nervous system couldn't handle it, and she kind of fell apart. But being the amazing human being that she is, she used that to kind of create change. So she went through all of the medical literature and studied what is called the placebo effect. So every time they do a study, you have the drug or the treatment, and then you also have to have a placebo group, which is where they're given like a saline solution or a fake surgery or something like that. Yeah, so the book's full of examples about that. And a lot of the examples in her book actually cross over with the ones in You Are the Placebo by Dr. Joe Dispenza. So they use a lot of the same data, and I actually made jokes about that, how they had called each other and, you know, said, oh, I'm so sorry, I did mine first. So just an example of like two of those stories. So there's one guy who, and I'm making it really short, but there's one guy who he had cancer riddled throughout his entire body. And basically in a desperate attempt to save his life, even though they couldn't, they said to him, oh, we've got this experimental drug. It's apparently amazing. So they give him this experimental drug, which was a placebo, and all of his cancer disappeared. So wild. So he's all better. And he's reading the paper one day and he reads about this trial that he was involved in, or that he believed he was involved in. And it said how it was just one big epic failure. And then before you know it, he's back in hospital and all of his cancer is back and he died. So I do believe that he had it come back and go away one more time. I forget all the details of the story, but that's one example. And then another one was with hip replacement surgery. I think they did 10 different hip replacements or 8 hip replacements, and 2 of them were placebo. So basically they opened up the hip and then they closed it again without actually replacing the joint, and they recovered. So it was like they never had a hip problem in their life. So wild, crazy. Yeah, so that's the kind of story that she talks about. I also met her in America in 2016. So I did her Whole Health Medicine Institute, which is like a 16-week course for healers, naturopaths, doctors, surgeons, this kind of thing. So I went there with 60 other women, like amazing people, all with a really similar story to hers. So they found that so they became doctors or surgeons in order to help heal people, because they're women, you know, they wanted to offer health and healing to the world. And then they just found that all that would happen is they'd have 5 minutes with a patient, have to give them a drug, they'd go off and come back a few months later worse than they were when they started, you know, and they all kind of had breakdowns for various reasons. Yeah, but that's how they found Lissa Rankin's work. And then the model she was teaching was like a 6-step healing method where you give your patient like an hour of your time, you know, and how you would structure that in a way that was still profitable so you could still make a living and heal people at the same time. Yeah, that's what her course was about. It was amazing. And through her course, I also got to meet people like Alberto Baloldo, which is a shaman / medical anthropologist. I ended up following his work later down the line. And Deepak Chopra, who's a really big spiritual / medical leader or thought leader. And Bruce Lipton, who is a biologist, and he is one of the people who actually made the original discovery on epigenetics. So he's really fascinating to watch on YouTube, Dr. Bruce Lipton, but his books I find really hard to read. So that's why he's not included in this, but he's actually amazing. And I met him in New Zealand in 2017. Awesome guy. Like I think he's in late 70s, but he acts like he's 30. Like you would never know he's that age. So that's the second book. So the third book that I want to recommend is by Dr. Gabor Mate, and it's called When the Body Says No. So that's this book. So what's really amazing about him is that he's spent like, I think about a 50-year career studying how emotions and trauma affect the body and the brain. So he's got these really amazing connections that he's made between, say, women with cancer and their inability to express their emotions, or how they always felt unseen. Dr. Lissa Rankin actually did a TED talk on loneliness and how it can kill you. So it's a legitimate thing. Human connection is very important. And trauma and, say, chronic stress. So trauma causes chronic stress. So if somebody says trauma, it's really just a stress in the body that's not resolved. It doesn't have to be anything super crazy. You know, the word's got a bit of weight to it, but it's really just chronic stress. So he talks about how this underlying stress in the body can manifest as disease through either physiological mechanisms like that psychoneuroimmunology route, or via just a lack of connection. So usually when you're traumatized, you tend to isolate because you're petrified of the world, like you're scared of the people around you. So you do things to numb. So one thing that he says that's really powerful, I think, because he does a lot of work with addicts, and he says, ask not why the addiction, ask why the pain. Because every addiction, whether it be food, exercise, you know, sex, gambling, anything, like whatever the addiction is, there's an underlying pain under there that we're trying to manage. When you have an addiction, your nervous system can't self-regulate, so you'll always look for something in the outside world in order to do that. So that's kind of his body of work. I find his YouTube talks amazing, and he's on podcasts and stuff like that. He's really good at speaking about what he does. I found the book, I had to read it in a lot of chunks because so many stories in there. Yeah, so I preferred him on YouTube, but yeah, the book is amazing. So that's the third book. So fourthly, we have A Mind of Her Own by Dr. Kelly Brogan. So that's this one. You can see. So she is a psychiatrist. So she spent her whole life prescribing psychiatric meds and ended up learning after she herself got depression that she didn't actually want to take that route, and so she explored natural means in order to deal with her own depression, and she succeeded. So that then obviously opened her mind up to this whole other world of, you know, nutrition and mindfulness and exercise and the impact that that has on your mental health. So her focus is very much on heal the body and you will then heal the mind. And she had a similar story to all the doctors that I met, Dr. Lissa Rankin's Medicine Institute, which was that she wanted to help people and then recognized that all she was doing was prescribing drugs, and she was never getting really any good feedback because these people were never feeling better. You know, they were just managing, or they try one drug and then need another drug and then need another drug, and it was really just a big guessing game. But nobody got any better, nobody had any accountability, nobody actually felt any happy, you know. So she's kind of done this whole turnaround, and she talks about things like the importance of animal protein in the diet, about fats, so healthy fats, particularly omega-3. It's very important for protecting your nervous system, and any mental health issue is very closely linked with your nervous system, because your brain, it is your nervous system. So if your nervous system is inflamed and there's not enough omega-3 available to repair that, then, you know, you're going to have some problems, a lot of inflammation. And then she talks about like blood sugar and how you have to balance your blood sugar. So that's impacted by things like carbohydrate consumption. So if you're binging on carbohydrates, your blood sugar is going to spike and crash back down. And the waves of this can lead to mood swings and a lot of hormonal imbalance and things like that. And then she kind of touches on casein, which is a dairy, and gluten as certain things you can avoid. She talks about other things as well, like pesticide. You know, there's a lot of detail in her book. And then she talks about sleep, exercise, and meditation, and how those things will actually contribute to your mental health too. So I think she does still do prescription drugs with people that need it. So she's more of a holistic doctor. She does whatever is needed, but with the intention of healing the patient and actually bringing them back to equilibrium. So she's really fascinating. And then the last book I wanted to share with you is Mind Over Matter by Dawson Church. So that's this one. Really great. This one's really cool. It's got like, I don't know if you can see, it's got like heaps of, lots of pictures. You know, it's a very visual, I really love visual books. You can see all my highlighting in there. Anyway, so he talks about basically the principle, very closely linked with Dr. Joe Dispenza. Actually, I think Dr. Joe Dispenza, did his forward. So as I was reading, I was like, I heard all this before, and then I realized, oh, it's Joe Dispenza. That makes sense. But both of them base a lot of their work on the study of our electromagnetic field. So every single human being, or every being on the planet, everything on the planet has an electromagnetic field that you can measure. So we have one that's like a meter, or it's like 5 foot, so like a meter and a bit that extends outward. So when you're at a Joe Dispenza workshop, they actually measure all of this. So they measure it as a group. So they'll measure the group electromagnetic field and they'll measure how it grows over the course of the week, because it's usually like a 3 or 4 or 5 day retreat. Yeah, so they collect all the scientific data on how the meditation and the learnings and stuff are impacting our nervous systems and then therefore our electromagnetic field. So technically, your thoughts project outward into the world and your emotions pull things back into the world. So we've kind of got this like apple core thing around us, and your thoughts go out and the emotions go back in, and it just kind of circles around and around. And the whole point of that study is that we have complete control over our own beings. So basically you're not a victim. So if you're attracting things into your life that are negative, there's something in the body that is drawing that in. So that's kind of what got me down the whole trauma healing path, because I was like, I don't understand why I'm attracting so many negative experiences into my life when I'm genuinely quite, positive, upbeat person with really good intentions. So I recognized by studying a lot of these people's work that there was something within my nervous system, that I wasn't aware of or that was unresolved that was actually drawing these negative experiences into my life. And by clearing that out, I actually stopped those negative things from being sucked into my energy field. So it's really fascinating. His book is full of science, and his tagline is like, science has become the language of mysticism, or the contemporary language of mysticism. So mysticism being like the mystics of the old days who used to mix like astrology with herbs and just weird things that they did. I've looked at a lot of old school medical practitioners, fascinating what they used to do. Most of them are philosophers too, which is really interesting. So this is kind of like the scientific proof of the existence of why those things work. Yeah, so by reading his book, you get a lot of information, a lot of empowerment around what you can do to control your own environment. And that's the same for all of those books. So they're all really informing in that way. So yeah, so that's my 5 books on the mind-body connection, scientific edition, we'll call it. I hope you enjoyed, and I will pop the links to these authors and the books down below so that you can access them. And that's it for this video. If you have read any of those or you're planning to read them, then let me know in the comments, or send me a message or an email or something, and I'll see you next week.